You've never met him, but he's there in the rise and fall of your rent, in the pulse of your credit card debt, in the fine print of your mortgage. He exists between numbers and nations, a shadow between balance sheets. He doesn't sell, persuade, or shout. He simply adjusts and the world bends. His tools are interest rates and silence. His language is expectation. He wields confidence the way others wield armies, turning invisible dials that decide who prospers and who drowns. He is 60 years old, though his public photos are decades younger. His face, pale and deliberate, carries the stillness of someone accustomed to global consequence. Each morning, he stands before the city skyline, silver hair brushed neatly, eyes like glass over a world he manipulates with calm precision. He doesn't seek fame. Power to him is quieter than applause. It's the ability to make billions move by saying nothing at all. He exists outside the calendar of politics. Presidents come and go, crises rise and fade, but he remains. His words weigh more than legislation, shaping the pulse of credit, the worth of labor, the rhythm of risk. To investors, he is both savior and saboteur, a whisper that moves billions before breakfast. He speaks rarely, and when he does, every syllable is dissected for prophecy. His genius lies not in what he reveals, but in what he conceals, the art of steering belief without showing direction. To the public, he's a name glimpsed in passing, a headline, a rumor, an abstraction. But inside trading rooms, he's a storm. His pauses turn into price action. His hesitation rewrites the future of currencies. Traders, analysts, and ministers all watch him, waiting for his next breath, the next coded message embedded in his tone. The power is not in his statement, but in the anticipation that surrounds it, the psychological theater of confidence. He doesn't sell a product or seek applause. His true commodity is trust, the collective faith that stability can be engineered. In a world addicted to certainty, he provides the illusion of control. Yet even he knows how fragile it is, how easily the system fractures when faith falters. Every announcement is a gamble. Every sentence can tilt millions of lives. Power, this quiet, demands solitude, because understanding it requires living without applause. And so begins his story, the man behind the curtain of modern finance, shaping destinies from conference rooms no one sees. The most powerful banker you've never met, the quiet governor of value and fear. His name might never echo in streets or screens, but every decision he makes touches your life. This isn't just a story about him. It's a story about us and the invisible hand we've chosen to believe in. Long before the corridors of marble and the cameras flashing at press briefings, there was silence, the kind that lingers in libraries after midnight. He was not born into power, but into austerity. A small industrial town, a father who worked night shifts at a textile mill, a mother who balanced grocery bills like equations. He learned early that numbers were not symbols of wealth, but shields against uncertainty. In school, he was quiet, a boy who stared too long at ledgers, who preferred the logic of balance sheets over the chaos of conversation. Ambition arrived not as greed, but as fear, the fear of instability, of losing what little existed. The boy who once counted coins beneath a flickering lamp would grow into a man who would one day control the flow of them for entire nations. At university, he devoured economics like scripture. While others drank and drifted through their 20s, he obsessed over patterns, the invisible strings that tied policy to pain, interest to survival. Professors called him brilliant, but brilliance was not what drove him. It was control. He believed that the world could be measured, that chaos could be tamed, if one only understood the formula behind it. Yet, in every victory, he felt a quiet unease, a sense that the human cost of numbers was never included in the model. His first job was at a regional bank, a room full of calculators, cigarette smoke, and tired men in gray suits. He learned the rhythm of credit and collapse, the art of appearing certain when nothing was. He saw loans turn to losses, Fortunes vanish overnight, and yet he admired the elegance of it, how a few decisions in a boardroom could determine the fate of hundreds. It wasn't morality that drew him deeper. It was fascination. Power, he realized, didn't need to shout. It could whisper through interest rates. He rose not through charm but through precision. Others spoke loudly in meetings. He listened. When markets panicked, he remained still. He mastered the language of restraint, knowing that confidence once projected could move billions. It wasn't brilliance that set him apart. It was composure. And in the calm of his demeanor, powerful men found reassurance. They began to call him in moments of crisis, to ask not for advice, but for certainty. By the time he reached his late 40s, he was no longer a man inside the system, he was the system. He had learned how nations borrow, how debt becomes diplomacy, how faith itself becomes currency. He understood that the modern world doesn't run on gold or oil or labor, it runs on confidence. And he had become its quiet custodian. Behind every government rescue, every market correction, every whispered decision in the night, his fingerprints lingered. He was no longer chasing stability for himself. He was manufacturing it for others. His first appearance on the world stage came wrapped in crisis. A currency collapse on another continent, sudden, contagious, merciless. He was 49. Appointed interim governor of the central bank after his predecessor resigned overnight. Television networks demanded certainty. Investors demanded calm, and governments demanded a miracle. He stood before cameras for the first time, hands clasped behind his back, a still figure against the chaos of flashing lights. His voice did not rise. It never would. Instead, he spoke of stability, liquidity, and resilience, words that carried the sound of safety even when none existed. That night, markets steadied. Not because of data, but because of faith. In that moment, he understood the terrifying simplicity of power. It wasn't about truth. It was about belief. The crisis passed, but its shadow never left him. Overnight, his name became synonymous with stability. He was invited to panels, quoted in headlines, idolized by traders who memorized his tone. But in quiet moments, when the cameras were gone, he began to wonder, had he saved the system or merely delayed its reckoning? The world had rewarded him not for solving chaos, but for soothing it. He realized then that finance was not mathematics, it was theater. A grand illusion requiring constant rehearsal. Every act built upon the faith that tomorrow would behave like yesterday. And he had become its leading actor. Years later came the global meltdown, a financial earthquake that toppled banks and governments alike. This time, he wasn't the understudy. He was the conductor. Cameras followed his every gesture. When he spoke, billions reacted. When he hesitated, markets froze. Behind the calm mask, he was calculating not numbers, but consequences. Every rate cut, every liquidity injection, every bailout carried a moral weight he could never fully confess. He didn't sleep much that year. The world expected him to fix what human greed had broken. He knew he could only postpone collapse, not cure it. But he also knew that in the theater of finance, postponement is victory enough. In public, he was called the voice of calm. In private, he became haunted by the silence that followed his speeches. He began to see the outlines of his power, invisible yet absolute. When he lowered rates, companies survived. When he raised them, people lost homes. His policies rippled into lives he would never see, shaping destinies without names. And though he never showed it, each decision left a residue, not guilt, but gravity. The man who once sought control was now trapped by it. By his late 50s, his voice had become law. Presidents paused when he spoke. Markets obeyed. Yet, in his quiet moments, he found himself staring out windows, wondering if the system he protected still served the people it was meant to. He understood that control was not mastery. It was maintenance, an endless act of preservation. He had become the most powerful banker in the world, and the loneliest man in it. The applause had faded. The numbers no longer comforted. And though the world saw him as a symbol of certainty, he knew that beneath every calculation lay a truth too human for algorithms. All economies are built on fear, and all power on fate. Power isolates. He learned that truth not in a boardroom, but in the silence of his own home. His wife had grown used to his absences, dinners eaten cold, anniversaries postponed, conversations replaced by headlines about him. They no longer fought. The distance had become polite. At 60, he began to understand that power demands sacrifice not in blood, but in presence. The very calm the world adored from him was built on emotional vacancy. He could control economies, but not connection. His life had become a perfect balance sheet, efficient, spotless, and entirely devoid of warmth. He often found himself awake before dawn, standing at the window, watching the city glow with the illusion of order he had helped create. He knew how fragile it was. Beneath the gleaming towers and efficient systems, people still lived paycheck to paycheck, held together by hope and credit. The stability he had engineered was not prosperity. It was postponement, a delay that kept the machine humming, even as its bolts loosened. He began to question whether his role was to protect the system or to protect the people trapped within it. The answer changed depending on who was asking and what time of night it was. In meetings, he began to speak less. His colleagues mistook it for authority. In truth, it was doubt. Every data point felt like a confession, numbers that smoothed the edges of human suffering. He saw charts of unemployment, inflation, and inequality, each line intersecting with lives the system barely acknowledged. He realized the machine was too vast to steer, too complex to confess its own harm. Yet, he stayed. Not because he believed, but because absence was worse. He had built his legacy on the illusion that someone was in control. To leave now would be to admit the illusion itself. That winter, he returned to his hometown unannounced, alone. The textile mill where his father once worked was gone, replaced by a logistics warehouse. The town felt smaller, quieter, stripped of ambition. He walked its streets unnoticed, just another older man in a long coat. For the first time in decades, he felt the weight of policy, not as numbers, but as absence. He stopped outside a shuttered grocery store. Inside the dusty window, a faded newspaper headline from years ago: "Bank Governor Stabilizes Global Markets." He looked at his reflection layered over the words. Stability, he thought, was never the same as salvation. On the flight back, he stared out the window into the endless night sky. Below, entire cities flickered like data points, a constellation of consequences he had once believed he could control. For the first time, he wondered whether his greatest achievement was not saving the world, but teaching it to depend on him. He closed his eyes, and for a fleeting second he envied the simplicity of those who believed the system worked because it had to. Power, he realized, is not freedom. It is servitude to an illusion so delicate, no one dares to wake from it. The tremors began quietly, a rumor in markets, a dip in confidence, an unexpected bankruptcy that spread like contagion. He had seen it before, but this time the pattern felt different, faster, meaner. Technology had replaced patience, and faith moved at the speed of data. Within hours, panic circled the globe. Currencies collapsed, banks froze, and governments called him again, their voices trembling through encrypted lines. He no longer felt the rush of relevance. He felt only fatigue. The same cycle, the same fear, human emotion dressed in digital disguise. But now, something inside him resisted the ritual. For decades, he had been the calm. Now even his voice cracked under the weight of disbelief. The world wasn't listening anymore. It was reacting uncontrollably. He went before cameras again, his expression unflinching, but his voice softened by something unfamiliar: humility. He announced emergency measures, liquidity injections, rate cuts, coordination among allies, the same language, the same choreography, but this time it sounded hollow. Reporters demanded certainty. He gave them syntax. As he spoke, he saw the reflection of himself in the camera lens, older, thinner, eyes shadowed with doubt. For the first time, he saw what the world saw, not a savior, but a symbol. Symbols can't fix reality. They can only delay its collapse. Outside, the anger grew. Protesters filled the streets of cities he had only seen through data charts. They carried signs with words he never imagined tied to his name. Thief, technocrat, system servant. The chants echoed through glass towers that once symbolized progress. He watched from his office window, not as a ruler, but as a witness. He realized then that the system wasn't collapsing because of numbers, it was collapsing because of belief. People no longer trusted the promise, and when belief dies, money dies with it. In the closed chambers of power, panic reigned. Ministers argued, data analysts spoke in acronyms, and the air thickened with desperation. He remained silent, listening to the sound of faith unraveling not in markets, but in men. Every leader in the room wanted reassurance. None wanted truth. He finally spoke. Voice low, but clear. "We can't print trust," he said. The room fell silent. For once his words weren't strategy, they were confession. Days later, the inevitable happened. Markets crashed, currencies imploded, and the global web of debt tore open. The man who had once been called the guardian of stability became a ghost in his own institution. He stood at the same window he had faced for 20 years and watched as the lights below flickered, banks closing, screens darkening. In the quiet that followed, he understood that his legacy would not be measured in GDP or inflation rates, but in the silence that follows the fall. He had not failed as a banker. He had succeeded as a human, finally admitting that no one, not even him, could hold chaos forever. When the storm passed, the world did not collapse completely. It simply adjusted. The markets found new prophets, new languages, new illusions. His name vanished from headlines, replaced by others who spoke faster, promised louder, and smiled more easily. He did not resist. For the first time in decades, no one called, no one asked, no one needed his voice to steady their world. He had been the pulse of a system. Now, he was its echo. He walked the city unnoticed, a relic of a quieter form of power, when words carried more weight than algorithms. He didn't mourn his relevance. He mourned the simplicity of being unseen. He moved to a quiet coastal town, no interviews, no headlines, no boardrooms. The sea became his metronome, its rhythm slower than markets, its logic older than money. Each morning he walked the shore, the waves whispering in a language he could not manipulate. He began to read again, philosophy, history, poetry, searching for meaning beyond the measurable. For the first time since childhood, he allowed uncertainty to exist without solving it. It was both terrifying and liberating. He still followed the market sometimes, out of habit. Old instincts never vanish, they hibernate. He watched new leaders make old mistakes, new crises emerge with different names. The patterns repeated, precise and inevitable. Yet now he saw them not as failures, but as cycles, tides of human ambition and fear that no policy could cure. He realized his life's work was not a lie. It was a story told too long without pause. The system had always been fragile, because people are fragile. And perhaps that was never a flaw, but a reflection. One afternoon, a young journalist found him. She had been researching the collapse and wanted his insight. She expected arrogance, defensiveness, maybe denial, not the quiet gentleness of an old man who smiled at her curiosity. They spoke for hours. She asked what he regretted most. He paused. Believing that control was the same as care, he said softly, They're not. Control is fear in disguise. Care is risk without reward. She wrote his words down, though she would never publish them. Some truths, she realized, are meant to remain private. He lived quietly after that, writing notes he never sent, reading until the pages blurred into dreams. Some evenings he walked the cliffs and watched the horizon fade into darkness, thinking how small the world looked when stripped of its abstractions. He knew the system would continue without him, just as it had before him, a living myth sustained by faith, fear, and repetition. But for the first time, he felt no need to participate. His story was not about loss of power. It was about the rediscovery of peace. As the wind rose around him, he smiled faintly. The world no longer needed his voice, and that, finally, was freedom. Years passed. The man who once defined the rhythm of markets was now a rumor, a footnote, a name that appeared occasionally in old articles about the crisis that changed everything. Students studied his decisions without knowing the sound of tea, his voice, or the way he hesitated before saying the word confidence. He had become an abstraction as distant and ungraspable as the forces he once controlled. In the silence of his later years, he often sat by the window, listening to the sea and the slow ticking of the clock. Time, he realized, was the only true interest rate, endlessly compounding, indifferent to intention. Once a year, a letter arrived from the central bank, ceremonial, perfunctory, thanking him for his service to global stability. He never replied. Instead, he folded the paper neatly and placed it in a drawer beside old family photos and a small silver pen that no longer worked. He understood now that systems forget their makers. That was their beauty and their cruelty. The machine endures precisely because the men who build it are designed to vanish into its gears. One morning, he walked the shoreline longer than usual. The tide was low, the sand cool beneath his shoes. The air carried the scent of salt and distance, a reminder that all things, no matter how vast, return to their origins. He thought about the world he once tried to control, the chaos, the greed, the beauty hidden inside imperfection. For the first time, he didn't feel responsible for it. He stopped, closed his eyes, and let the wind move through his hair. Somewhere across the ocean, markets opened, algorithms traded, and history began another cycle without him. Weeks later, a storm struck the coast. His cottage windows rattled through the night, but he didn't wake. The next morning, neighbors found him in his chair by the window, eyes closed, hands folded, a faint smile frozen on his face. The world did not pause. Headlines rolled on. Markets opened as usual. There was no obituary on the front page, no memorial broadcast, no speech in Parliament, only a quiet line in the financial section. Former central banker dies at 70. It was enough. He had lived his life like interest, invisible, essential, and temporary. Months later, the young journalist returned to the coast. She found the cottage empty, the windows boarded, the air heavy with salt and silence. On the table, beneath a thin layer of dust, she discovered a single note, written in elegant handwriting. "Money is not the measure of value. Time is." She folded it carefully, pocketed it, and stepped outside. The wind rose from the sea, carrying the faint hum of tides, steady, patient, eternal. As the camera drifts upward, the coastline stretches endlessly into horizon light, where the sea meets the sky in seamless balance. The world continues, indifferent yet beautiful, powered not by control, but by faith in motion.